Week 17 of the fantasy football season with championships here for fantasy owners. He's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking this week. Number one, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. What a season it's been for Puka Nacua. Last week, he went off with a monster game, 225 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. Once again, it looks like Davante Adams is going to be out in this game. And this week, in a great matchup with the Falcons, it wouldn't be surprising if he gets anywhere from 150 to 175 in this one. Number 2, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. It's been a great season for JSN. Pretty much weekly, it seems like he's getting 100 yards and a touchdown. And this week, mediocre matchup with the Panthers, where this Panther defense has been better at home than they've been on the road. But I think JSN, he's been a beast all season long, and he'll go out there and get his numbers once again. Number 3, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase, he's having a monster year once again as Ja'Marr Chase. And this season, we know Burrow was out for a majority of the season. But now with Burrow back, the last few weeks now back in the lineup, he's putting up his elite numbers. He was the number 1 pick for a reason, and this week, a great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. Number 4, Amon St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. This week, a good matchup with the Minnesota Vikings. I know the defense the last couple of weeks has definitely played better, especially going into Dallas a few weeks ago and holding down one of the better offenses in the league under 30 points. So this week in Minnesota, I think the Lions, their defense is going to put their offense in good position on the field, where obviously Max Brosmer is in their quarterback, and St. Brown, he's been a great wide receiver for many seasons. And this week in a division matchup, I think he bounces back after he had a down game last week. Number 5, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb, it's been a solid season for him once again. I know missed a few weeks early in the year with injury as Lamb, but this week it's a great matchup with the Commanders, a defense that can't stop anyone and a depleted secondary. So I expect them to bounce back after a mediocre game last week. Number 6, A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. First half of the year, he didn't do anything, and now the last month and a half, him and Jalen Hurts back on the same page. He's putting up big points. He's putting up a lot of yards. It seems like 100 yards every game minimum for Brown. And this week should be a high-scoring game at the Buffalo Bills. Number 7, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. It's been a great season for Chris Olave. And when healthy, I've been saying this a lot, he's one of the better wide receivers in the league. And him and Tyler Shough have great rapport. This week, a pretty good matchup with the Tennessee Titans, one of the worst teams in the league. And Olave's getting peppered with targets where pretty much it's just him and Juwan Johnson in the passing game. Number 8, George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. Pickens last week, he bounced back with a big ball game, 130 yards, and found the end zone after a couple weeks in a row. He didn't do much, and this week in a matchup at the Commanders, like I said, with Lamb, that can't stop anyone. And I expect the Cowboys to put up a decent amount of points. He's a solid top 10 option. Number 9, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So last week, he was back in the lineup, was London. This week, a tougher matchup versus the Rams, even though their secondary has been leaky at times this season, especially last week blowing the lead to Seattle and losing. But Drake London, he's a solid wide receiver. Him and Kirk Cousins have had great rapport going back the last couple seasons since Cousins signed there. And London this week versus the Rams, after last week was limited a little bit, I think bounces back. 10, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So Collins, he had a down game last week, and we rarely see 2 games in a row where he can't go out there and put up numbers. So this week, a matchup indoors once again at the Chargers. Their defense early in the game last week gave up a lot of yards to Pickens until second half. They made adjustments, but I think Nico Collins, as the number 1 option in this offense for this Texan team, will go out there and bounce back. Number 11, T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Higgins, we know he's a lethal wide receiver. Him and Chase, arguably the best 1-2 combo in the league at the receiving position on the same team. And last week, he came back after he was out a couple games, was T. Higgins, and he picked up where he left off. So he's a big deep ball threat. He's a guy that can run all the routes. And this week, it's a good matchup versus a Cardinal team that can't stop anyone. 12, Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So last week, he was a little limited, it seemed, was Mike Evans, but still went out there, found the end zone early in the game to set the tone on a nice fade route, even though they did lose at the Panthers. And this week, it's a slam dunk matchup with the Miami Dolphins, a defense that can't stop anyone. And we saw Cincinnati go out there last week and go up and down the field versus defense. 13, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So JMO, he's been putting up some big games since Dan Campbell's taken over the play calling over the last month and change of the season. So this week, a matchup indoors at the Minnesota Vikings. Their defense is a middle-of-the-pack unit, but I think this Viking defense is going to get tired out early and often, where obviously Max Brosmer is going to be the starting quarterback, and he's going to be in for a long day like we saw early in the season versus the Seahawks. I think this week, JMO, he goes out there, He's going to get his opportunities, and we know he's one of the more game-breaking wide receivers in the league, where it just takes him one step and he can burn a secondary. 14, Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. A solid year it's been for Jauan Jennings, even with a lot of injuries. He's going out there, he's producing, and this week it's a matchup versus the Bears, where their defense isn't all that great as the Chicago DST. And I think Jauan Jennings, once again, you could pencil him in for at least 50, 60 yards and a touchdown. Even if George Kittle's in or out of the game, it doesn't matter. He's been productive all season long. 15, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. So Courtland Sutton having a great season. Last week he had a big ball game once again versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, even though it was a bad loss. And this week it's at the Kansas City Chiefs, where they're done and depleted, where last week we saw Tennessee go up and down the field versus them, where after losing Mahomes and getting eliminated from playoff contention, this defense, I think, pretty much is mailing it in after a tough loss last week versus the Jaguars. I think this offense is going to come out quicker and putting points on the board earlier. 16, Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Myers, he got a nice contract extension a couple weeks ago, 3 years, $60 million deals, and he's the number one option in this passing game. He's already leaped Brian Thomas, in my opinion, as the number one option, and he's only been here since the trade deadline, is Jacoby Myers. So this week, a good matchup at the Indianapolis Colts. That last week, they got destroyed in that one, where we saw Jauan Jennings have a big game and George Kittle. So I think Jacoby Myers and Lawrence keep the momentum going, and he has another solid game. 17 to Tor McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. So Ted McMillan, it's been a good rookie season for him. I know up and down. It's been inconsistent games for him, but you could tell the talent's there, and boy, he was the number one wide receiver coming out in the NFL draft this season. So last week he had a nice game, 19 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Ted McMillan had. This week it is a tougher matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league, in my opinion, in the Seattle Seahawks. But I think Ted McMillan, if they're chasing points like they did early last week, he's going to put some points on the board. And like I said, especially at home, he's been a better receiver than he's been on the road this season. 18, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. So Jefferson had one of his better games in like 2 months, where he had 14.5 fantasy points last week, Justin Jefferson. But now Max Brosman, their quarterback, we saw a few weeks ago versus Seattle, he couldn't move the football and get anything going. And Justin Jefferson, he's definitely been a bust where he went in that first round this season, and the production really hasn't been there. But this week in a matchup versus division rival, the Lions, a team obviously he's used to playing, I think he could go out there, Jefferson, even with Brosmer in there quarterback, and put up receiver 2 numbers. 19, Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. Wilson, it just seems like weekly he's finding the end zone, obviously with Brissett in there. But obviously as well, his numbers have gone down this season. When Marvin Harrison's in the lineup, production's way down for Wilson. The few games Marvin was out, 30 points a game he was averaging about in PPR league. So this week at Cincinnati, this could be a high-scoring game. The Bengals have put their points on the board, and the Cardinals, for the most part, garbage time or not, have put points on the board. 20, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. So this week, a good matchup versus Tampa Bay. Their defense can't stop anyone, but Quinn Ewers, this whole offense takes a hit of the Miami Dolphins. But like I said, Waddle, number one option in the passing game. I think volume will be there for him. And Ewers, he's going to have to rely on the veteran if they're going to want to move the football down the field consistently. 21, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So we'll see if Lamar's in this game or not, where he's banged up with a back injury. And this week it is a tougher matchup at the Green Bay Packers, one of the better defenses in the league, even with Micah Parsons out for the season. But Zay Flowers last week had a big game. And then, of course, like typical Zay Flowers, though, a bad fumble in a crucial situation. So this week I think Flowers, even in a tougher matchup, could go out there and put up some decent numbers. And he's also the number one option in this passing game, where there's not much going on at all besides Flowers. 22, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots. So Stephon Diggs last week had a big game, and it just seems like on primetime games is where he shows up and he puts up his numbers as Diggs. So this week it is a slam dunk matchup at the New York Jets, a defense that can't stop anyone. We know they traded their 3 best defenders at the deadline: Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, Michael Carter. And I think Diggs this week at the Jets could go out there and give you solid receiver 2 production. 23, Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. So last week it looked like he was going to be off to the races for a monster game. We had 11 fantasy points in the first quarter in PPR leagues, finding the end zone Smith. And then the remainder of the game, he didn't do much, finishing up with 17.5 fantasy points was Devonta Smith. This week could be a high-scoring game at the Buffalo Bills. And we know Smith, him and Hurts, they've been locked in. I know this season Early in the year, these guys weren't on the same page, but they've been back over the last 6 weeks of the season and making plays, and he's been a good fantasy option once again. 24, DJ Moore, the Chicago Bears. The last few weeks for DJ Moore, he's starting to get things going. We know Rome Odunze, it doesn't look like he's going to return this week for this bad team. I think they're going to save him for the playoffs. And Luther Burden, he's been decent so far in his rookie year, but he's been banged up, and he's questionable to play this week. So right now, Moore's the last man standing in the receiving room. Obviously, he's a guy who could go out there and put up fantasy points. And this week, it's an okay matchup at the 49ers, but it's just been hit or miss all season long with DJ Moore. And also Caleb Williams has been inconsistent at times as well. 25, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So Terry McLaurin, he's putting up some numbers since he's been back from the quad injury over the last few weeks. And this week it is a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, one of the worst secondaries in all football. And I think Scary Terry, he could go out there where he's had a great track record versus Cowboy team throughout his career. Put up solid numbers. 26, Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants, number one option in the pass game for this New York Giant team. But the only thing, last week they took big precaution with Jackson Dart. He only threw the football 13 times. He didn't look like the same quarterback he was early in the season. I know they're trying to protect him not to get another head injury. But hey, if Dart, they're not going to let him go out there and play his game, what's the point of him really starting a quarterback for this Giant team? But regardless who the quarterback is, Robinson this season has been the best option in the passing game for this Giant team since Neighbors went down. And this week, it's a great matchup at the Raiders. 27, Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Rice last week missed the game. This week, we'll see if he's going to be back. And it is a tough matchup with the Broncos coming in. And obviously, they're down to their third-string quarterback now, where Mahomes out for the season, tore the ACL a few weeks ago. And Minshew didn't tear his ACL last week, but he hurt the knee, and he was put on IR. So this week, I don't think the ceiling's high for Rashee Rice, with Chris Oklunga most likely starting as their third-string quarterback. 28, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So McConkey's numbers have definitely taken a hit over the last few weeks. He did score a touchdown last week, and then second half, he didn't do anything in that ball game at the Dallas Cowboys after he had a nice first half. And also, this is a very tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league in the Houston Texans. So like I said, Ladd McConkey early in the season struggled, middle of the season bounced back, and now the last couple weeks for the most part his numbers haven't been great. So this week I think he's down a little bit in the ranking. You know, Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers, to me he's the number one wide receiver is Christian Watson for this Packer team. Romeo Doubs, he's banged up, even though it looks like he's going to give it a go this week versus the Baltimore Ravens. And also Jaden Reed, he's been back over the last 3 weeks, and he really hasn't had much impact on the game. But we know a couple weeks ago, Watson, he got hurt with Surtain going up for one of the passes. He landed on the shoulder and his chest, but he played in last week's game. So this week in the matchup versus the Ravens, where we just saw, obviously, the Patriots go up and down the field versus defense, I think with Jordan Love possibly returning, or even if it's Malik Willis in there quarterback, I think this week Christian Watson could bounce back and have a decent game. 30, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. The last couple weeks, Franklin, he's gone out there. He's making plays for this Denver Bronco team. He's a good deep ball threat he's been for Denver. And also intermediate routes and yard after catch guys been. So him and Bo Nix, they're starting to connect. He's the number 2 option easily in the passing game behind Courtland Sutton. And this week in the matchup at Kansas City, not the greatest on paper, but I think he could go out there, Franklin, and have another good performance. 31, Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. Alec Pierce last week found the end zone twice. And Phillip Rivers, the first half of that game, he looked very sharp, and he was running that offense easily, where he was making all the right checks, making all the right reads, and him and Pierce have a good rapport. Pierce, he's a big target and a guy who could go up and get it. So this week in the matchup with the Jaguars coming in, a division matchup, potential high-scoring game, I like Pierce as a flex option. Number 3 receiver, 32, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. So the last couple weeks, he's been banged up in and out of the lineup. Marvin Harrison played last week. He barely saw the field. And one of the plays, he did have a jump ball in the back of the end zone, but it hit off his hands and he couldn't come out with it. So this week, we'll see if the snap count goes up, but his ceiling's low, even in a good matchup at Cincinnati. 33, Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. So Deebo Samuel, it's been an up-and-down season for him. Obviously, the numbers were way up early in the season where Terry McLaurin, he was out with injury. And the last couple weeks, Deebo, he's nothing more than a low-ceiling type of wide receiver. But this week, it is a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys. And if you're in a pinch, I still would have some confidence to put him out there in your lineup. 34, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Godwin's getting his legs under him of late. And Emeka Egbuka, with all these guys returning to the lineup, and Bucky Irvin, Mike Evans, and Godwin, the last month of the season is really taking a hit. So Godwin this week, a good matchup on paper at the Miami Dolphins. And obviously this is a must-win game for Tampa Bay, and I think they're going to come out aggressively throwing that football. 35, Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Brian Thomas, it's been a down year. He's been a bust. A lot of drop passes, scared to cross the middle, and he's been dealing with nagging injuries on and off. And even with this offense putting up a lot of points over the last month of the season, Brian Thomas, he's only had a couple good games. So this week it is a good matchup in Indianapolis. We just saw Brock Purdy in the 9 put up a monster performance with Purdy throwing 5 touchdowns in that game. So this week, I just can't count on Brian Thomas. We're all season long, and obviously we're here in the final week of the season. He hasn't done much, and he's definitely been a bust. In the final receiver, Michael Pittman, staying in the same game of the Indianapolis Colts. So Michael Pittman, it's been a decent season for him. This offense obviously was rolling with Daniel Jones in there, quarterback, and ever since he went down, everyone's numbers have gone down, even though, like I said, Phillip Rivers looked good in last week's game. And this week in a matchup versus Jacksonville, where they're most likely going to be chasing points or in a high-scoring track meet, I like him as a third receiver flex option. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.